Developing a knight to f3 initiates a flexible opening, preparing to contest the center and potentially launch an attack on the king side. Mirroring white's knight development establishes immediate central tension and prepares for flexible pawn play. Opening the door for central pawn advances, c4 boldly contests the center and challenges black's early knight development. Unlocking central space for the bishop, this prepares for a solid kingside development and potentially opens lines for future pawn breaks. Developing the king's knight to g3 prepares a fianchetto for the bishop, aiming to control the long diagonal and reinforce the queenside advance. Asserting central influence, black challenges white's ambitions for queenside space. Developing the bishop to target the central queenside pawn, preparing for a solid pawn structure and active piece play. This principled development solidifies black's pawn structure, preparing for castling and a more harmonious piece deployment. Castling proactively secures the monarch, preparing for central pawn expansion and piece development. Solidifying the king's safety now allows for a more flexible development of black's pieces. Solidifying central influence, this establishes a pawn chain and prepares for queen's knight development. Developing the knight to d7 shores up the central pawn structure and prepares for a potential queenside expansion. Sharpening the fianchetto's reach, white prepares to reinforce the queenside pawn structure and potentially contest the c-file. Solidifying the queenside pawn structure, this prepares to fianchetto the bishop and challenge white's central control. Developing the bishop to this diagonal prepares pressure along the long light-squared diagonal, eyeing black's queenside and reinforcing central control. Positioning the bishop actively on the long diagonal prepares for potential pressure on white's queenside. Striking the center immediately, this capture clarifies the pawn structure, potentially opening lines for the bishop. Opening the e-file now allows for greater activity, while solidifying central pawn presence. Developing the knight to its most natural square, preparing to contest the center and potentially pressure black's queenside. The rook bravely ventures to the e-file, seeking active participation and preparing for potential pressure. Unleashing a knight to the central outpost immediately challenges black's pawn structure and opens avenues for further piece activity. The bishop repositions, contesting the crucial light squares and preparing to influence the central action. Injecting dynamism, white aggressively advances the f-pawn, aiming to disrupt black's pawn structure and potentially open lines towards the enemy king. A bold centralizing maneuver, instantly challenging white's knight and preparing to exploit the d4 pawn. This exchange opens the d-file, a welcome development for white's queen and rook, potentially creating attacking opportunities. Black recaptures, creating a mobile pawn chain that offers potential central influence and opens diagonals for the bishop. Opening the e-file solidifies the central pawn structure and prepares for future queenside expansion. Instilling a solid central presence, this knight now aims to control key squares and prepare for potential queenside advances. Preparing to seize control of the e-file while preventing black's pieces from finding active squares. Opening the c-file promises dynamic play and challenges white's queenside pawn structure. The queen now aims to support the central advance, potentially unblocking the light-squared bishop's diagonal. Liberating the c-file opens up possibilities, but be wary of the exposed kingside. Unleashing the bishop to reclaim material, this recapture aims to resolve central pawn tension and activate white's pieces, potentially opening lines towards black's king. Reclaiming the center with the queen establishes a more active pawn structure and prepares for potential knight advances. Expanding on the queenside opens new avenues for piece activity. Challenging white's queenside space by opening lines for the queenside attack. Constricting black's queenside mobility, this advance aims to stifle counterplay and secure a territorial advantage. Sacrificing the bishop on e5 unravels white's pawn structure, opening diagonals and creating attacking possibilities. Reclaiming the bishop solidifies control of the central light squares and prepares for an onslaught on the queen side. Restructuring pieces after the exchange, this knight seeks active squares, potentially preparing a central pawn push or outflanking maneuver. Reinforcing the central outpost for the knight becomes a priority after this exchange. Knight repositioning to challenge central pawn control and prepare for potential outpost occupation. Unleashing a pawn thrust to pry open lines and pressurize black's kingside, a bold, ambitious declaration. Regrouping the knight allows for better control of key squares and prepares for counterplay on the queen side. Sacrificing a pawn to unlock the f-file and create attacking chances against black's king suddenly seems appealing. A clever maneuver, aiming to deflect white's knight from the key central square and open lines for counterplay. Unleashing a direct assault on the king's defenses, the queen penetrates, aiming for tactical disruptions and potential mating threats. Liberating the knight to the central square offers excellent attacking potential and puts pressure on white's king. The rook surges forward, aiming to exploit the weakened kingside pawns. Finally stabilizing the knight, this repositions it for a more active role, potentially eyeing the king's defenses. Unlocking the g-file opens aggressive avenues towards the enemy monarch, aiming to exploit weakened pawn structures. Reclaiming the open d-file solidifies central control and prepares for a potential pawn push or piece maneuver. Unleashing a stunning queen sacrifice, white aims to shatter black's king's safety.